Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm going to start this off with a question for you. Because when we talk about fitness goals,
Yeah.
New Year's goals, summer body goals,
hmm
it almost always boils down to one thing, right? What we see in the mirror.
Right. The aesthetics.
Exactly. We're focused on cutting fat, hitting a certain number on the scale, maybe getting that visible definition.
And, that aesthetic motivation is really powerful. We shouldn't just dismiss it entirely.
No, of course not. It gets people moving.
It does. But today, we're going to use that motivation to dig. Well, to dig much, much deeper. Because what our stack of sources shows is that if you're only focused on weight or only what the mirror shows, you are likely overlooking the single most critical asset you have for your long-term health and really your independence.
Okay, let's unpack that right away. We're looking past the superficial today because the whole mission of this deep dive is to show scientifically that muscle isn't just, decorative tissue.
Not at all. It's a vital, active endocrine organ.
An endocrine organ. And it might just be the strongest predictor of your health and longevity.
Right.
Maybe even more important than metrics like weight or BMI alone.
Exactly. We've pulled material from some of the most influential research in muscle physiology, public health, gerontology, you name it. We're talking about the deep science that explains exactly how and why building and just maintaining muscle is like a literal investment in your future self.
That is a huge shift in perspective for
Yeah.
most people. If health really means muscle, then we need to understand everything it does. So if you're listening today, this dive is going to cover 7, critical roles that muscle plays.
Right.
We've got movement, metabolism, hormonal balance, bone protection, brain health, daily performance, and the big one, longevity. These are 7 pillars we're building today.
And before we jump into all that science, just a quick resource mention. We are going to be getting into some complex studies and concepts here. So for anyone who wants clear, practical articles on fitness, nutrition, and wellness, including a lot more on this topic, you can find all of it for free at bfit.ai. We're giving you the high-level analysis, but that practical context is always there for you.
Okay, so let's go back to that historical context you mentioned. For decades, the public health conversation was basically centered on the fear of obesity and fat.
It was. The message was always lose weight.
Just lose weight, yeah. And that led to, a focus on calorie counting and tons of cardio.
Right. And the huge problem with that model is that it often failed to differentiate between fat mass and lean mass. I mean, people would celebrate weight loss on the scale, even if a big chunk of that lost weight was metabolically essential muscle tissue.
That's the critical flaw, isn't it? If I lose 10 pounds and say 4 of those pounds are muscle, I've actually made my metabolic engine less efficient.
You have, and that's the new research paradigm. I mean, while reducing excessive body fat is still important for cardiovascular health, the real measure of your physical resilience is maintaining and ideally building lean muscle mass.
You can be at a healthy BMI and still be, metabolically compromised if your muscle mass is low. That's the addition we'll touch on later. But first, let's explore why muscle is such a powerhouse, starting with its role in regulating our internal chemistry.
All right, segment 1. Muscle as a metabolic powerhouse and regulator. So let's start with that engine analogy. When we say muscle is metabolically active, that can sound like jargon.
It does, yeah.
What does that actually mean, and how does it translate into, our daily energy burn?
It's jargon that is so crucial to understand. In simple terms, muscle is just constantly working. It's consuming resources, producing byproducts. It's alive.
Unlike fat.
Well, unlike adipose tissue body fat, which is mostly just an energy storage depot, it's relatively inert, metabolically speaking. Muscle, on the other hand, needs constant maintenance, repair, and synthesis, even when you're just sitting on the couch.
So it's a high-maintenance tissue. Precisely. That's a great way to put it. If we compare a pound of muscle to a pound of fat, that muscle tissue is burning significantly more calories every single day just to exist.
Okay, let's try to put some numbers to that, even if they're just estimates. If someone adds, say, 10 pounds of muscle over a year of training, what kind of passive calorie burning advantage are we talking about?
So the exact figures are always debated in the literature, but the consensus is clear. It's not a massive difference per pound. Some sources might say muscle burns about 6 calories per pound per day at rest versus maybe 2 for fat.
Okay, so it's not a magic bullet.
Not a magic bullet, no. But the cumulative effect is really powerful. Over time, that higher resting metabolic rate, your RMR, means you just have a more flexible caloric budget. It makes accidental weight gain less likely, and it makes maintaining a weight goal way easier because your baseline energy burn is just higher.
Right, before you even do a workout.
Before you even think about a workout, it's passive energy consumption working for you 24/7. It's like you've equipped your body with a more efficient, perpetually running power generator.
I get the RMR benefit. But you suggested the most crucial metabolic role is actually blood sugar control. Why is muscle so much better than other organs in regulating glucose?
Because muscle is the primary sink for glucose. It's the main destination. Roughly 80% of the glucose that leaves your bloodstream after you eat a meal is taken up by your skeletal muscle.
80%, wow.
Yeah. So when you have more muscle mass, you just automatically have more storage capacity for that sugar. It's like having a bigger gas tank in your car.
But it's not just the size of the tank, is it? It's about how quickly and efficiently the body can get the fuel into that tank. That's where insulin sensitivity comes in.
That is the critical mechanism. When we exercise, especially with resistance training, we trigger a cascade of events that dramatically improves our insulin sensitivity.
And insulin is the hormone that acts like the key,
Yeah.
right? Unlocking the muscle cells to let the glucose in.
Exactly. When you have poor insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, those locks are rusty. The body has to pump out way more insulin to try and force the glucose in. This leads to hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, and eventually type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome.
So the goal is to make those muscle cells super responsive to just a small turn of the key. How does lifting weights actually achieve that on a molecular level?
It's largely done by upregulating and moving around these specific glucose transporters, mainly one called GLUT4.
Okay.
When you contract your muscle fibers, especially in a tough workout, these GLUT4 transporters move from inside the cell to the surface membrane. They basically line up at the door, ready to pull glucose into the cell.
And that's the amazing part, right? It can even happen without insulin.
In the immediate post-exercise window, yes. It can often bypass the need for insulin entirely. The mechanical stress of the workout itself creates this temporary, non-insulin-dependent pathway for clearing glucose from your blood.
That's fascinating. So the workout itself is like a temporary cure for insulin resistance.
It is, and the long-term benefit comes from keeping that high level of muscle mass and being consistent with your training. It ensures those cell receptors stay primed and sensitive. This improved efficiency just dramatically lowers the workload on your pancreas and reduces all the risk factors for cardiovascular disease that come with metabolic problems.
That's probably the biggest. So what, for anyone listening who's worried about managing their blood pressure or their diabetes risk?
Absolutely. It's a glucose disposal unit that's running efficiently 24/7.
Okay, so from glucose management, let's pivot to systemic health. You mentioned that muscle acts like its own internal pharmacy by fighting inflammation.
Yes, through the secretion of what are called myokines. This is a relatively new discovery in muscle physiology, and it's truly transformative. For centuries, we just saw muscle as contractile tissue. It moves bones. Now we know it's a powerful endocrine organ that's communicating with your brain, your liver, your immune system, even your fat tissue.
So what are these myokines and how do they actually fight inflammation?
Myokines are these small signaling proteins that are released by your muscle fibers when they contract. You can think of them as chemical messengers. One key example is interleukin-6, or IL-6.
Okay, I've heard of IL-6, isn't that a bad thing? Pro-inflammatory.
It's complicated. You're right. In chronic disease states, high IL-6 is a pro-inflammatory signal. It's bad news. But, and this is the amazing part, when it's released by contracting muscle tissue during a hard workout, it actually acts as an anti-inflammatory signal.
Wow, so the context of the release completely changes its function.
Completely. When you're sick, high IL-6 is bad. When you're squatting heavy, high IL-6 is part of the healing and regulatory process. It helps suppress that chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation that's behind things like arthritis, heart disease, and even neurodegeneration.
So every time we do a dedicated resistance exercise, we're basically bathing our body in a powerful, self-regulated dose of anti-inflammatory medicine.
That's a perfect way to think about it. And there are other myokines too, like irisin.
What does that one do?
Irisin is often called the exercise hormone. It helps promote the browning of white fat cells, basically turning energy-storing fat into energy-burning fat. And it helps regulate metabolism and suppress chronic inflammation.
This just shifts the whole conversation. Strength training isn't just for looks. It's essential regulatory medicine.
It is the ultimate preventative measure. By actively contracting your muscles, you're regulating your own internal immune and inflammatory response systems. You're telling your body to stay balanced.
And if muscle is managing the immune system and our metabolism, it must be managing other internal chemistry too.
What about broader hormonal balance, especially as we get older?
It plays a huge role there. Resistance training is one of the most potent non-drug methods for maintaining levels of critical anabolic hormones, like testosterone and growth hormone, that typically start to decline as we move into our 40s and beyond.
I think a lot of people hear testosterone and growth hormone and think of like extreme athletes, but they're foundational for just general health, aren't they? Oh, absolutely. For both men and women, adequate levels of GH&T are essential for maintaining muscle mass, bone density, healthy skin, energy levels, just overall vitality.
And strength training helps keep those levels up.
Yes, the key is that resistance training, especially when you use heavy compound movements, think squats, deadlifts, presses, it creates a systemic demand that triggers a powerful, though temporary, post-exercise spike in these hormones.
And why do those big compound lifts matter so much more here than, say, bicep curls?
Because they involve the largest muscle groups, your legs, your back, your chest. That creates the biggest metabolic disturbance and the greatest mechanical demand. This systemic signal is what the hypothalamus and pituitary gland need to ramp up the production and release of T and GH. Isolation exercises just don't create that same robust hormonal response.
Okay, and what about the flip side? What about regulating the stress hormone, cortisol?
Equally important. While any acute exercise will raise cortisol temporarily, that's part of the adaptation process, consistent, structured exercise is critical for regulating your chronic stress response.
And chronic high cortisol is bad.
Very bad. It's highly catabolic, meaning it breaks down muscle tissue, and it promotes the accumulation of central fat, especially that dangerous visceral fat around your organs. So resistance training, when it's balanced with good recovery, provides a healthy outlet for stress and ultimately improves the regulation of cortisol, which in turn lowers that chronic systemic inflammation.
So to synthesize this whole first segment, muscle is this dynamic, metabolically hungry, and chemically intelligent organ. It manages our bloodstream with GLUT4. It secretes its own anti-inflammatory drugs like irisin. And it helps synchronize our critical hormones by boosting the good ones and regulating the bad ones. It's a holistic internal manager.
That's the perfect summation. And this internal management extends far beyond our trunk and limbs. It reaches directly into the brain.
Okay, here's where the science just gets truly mind-bending.
Yeah.
Segment 2. Muscle protects the body and sharpens the mind. We always hear that cardio is great for the brain, but how does the act of lifting a heavy weight actually translate into better cognitive function?
So the primary mechanism is that brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, that you mentioned earlier. We called it fertilizer for the brain cells, but let's go a little deeper for the listener.
Yeah, I want to know the whole story. What is the actual pathway that connects, say, a contracting quad muscle during a squat to improved memory?
It's a biochemical signal that's initiated by mechanical stress. When your muscles contract vigorously during resistance training, they don't just produce myokines, they also produce lactate.
Lactate, I thought that was just a waste product that makes you sore.
That's the old thinking. It used to be seen as just a fatigue byproduct, but we now know it's a critical signaling molecule.
And this lactate, it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
It does. Once lactate gets into the brain, it triggers a cascade of events that leads to a big increase in the production of BDNF. And BDNF is a protein that is absolutely essential for neuroplasticity.
Which is the brain's ability to rewire itself.
Exactly, to form new neural connections and also for neurogenesis, the actual creation of new neurons, especially in the hippocampus.
And the hippocampus is the brain's memory center.
It's vital for memory and learning. So lifting weights increases the raw materials and the signaling molecules that literally rebuild and enhance the critical memory center of your brain. That just fundamentally reframes my understanding of exercise.
It really does. It's an investment in your mental longevity. And we see this connection so clearly in the clinical evidence. I mean, studies, journals like Age and Aging show a strong, direct link between higher levels of muscle strength,
And how do they measure that?
usually by grip strength or leg strength, and superior performance on complex cognitive tasks in older adults. Things like executive function and processing speed.
It seems so counterintuitive to the traditional image of aging where you'd prioritize, Sudoku or crosswords over squats for your brain.
It challenges that dogma completely.
Yeah.
In fact, our sources cite this powerful quote from Dr. Teresa Lou Ambrose, a leading brain health researcher. She said, "Muscle strength is one of the strongest predictors of cognitive health as we age." It suggests that maintaining physical power is a prerequisite for maintaining mental power. If you want a sharp mind at 80, you need strong legs at 60.
Does that mental benefit stop at just cognitive function, or are there implications for mental health too?
Oh, absolutely. It extends to mental health.
Yeah.
The release of endorphins and just better sleep quality from regular strength training are well-documented factors in reducing symptoms of mild to moderate depression and anxiety.
And there's a confidence piece too, right?
A huge confidence piece. I mean, achieving strength goals gives you this profound boost in self-efficacy. When you feel physically capable, you just approach the world differently.
That is the ultimate protective package. But let's look at what happens when that protective strength starts to slip away. When does that decline begin?
This is a critical and often ignored topic of sarcopenia.
Which is age-related muscle loss.
Right. And it's not something reserved for the elderly. The process begins shockingly early, often in our 30s.
Our 30s, that seems so young. How rapidly does this happen if we do nothing about it?
The rate of decline can be pretty significant. After age 30, muscle mass typically declines at a rate of 3% to 8% per decade, and that rate accelerates substantially after you hit 50. This isn't just about losing some vanity pounds, it's a loss of functional power. The muscle fibers themselves shrink, and importantly, the ratio of your endurance fibers to your power and strength fibers shifts. You lose power even faster than you lose mass.
And the practical implication of losing that power is?
Frailty. Sarcopenia leads directly to a drop below what we call the functional threshold.
Okay, what's that?
That's the minimum level of strength you need to perform daily activities without strain, things like getting up off the floor, opening a tight jar, or recovering your balance if you stumble.
So when you dip below that threshold?
Frailty sets in. And that leads to a profound loss of independence, a huge increase in the risk of falls, and a high likelihood of needing assistance or institutionalization later in life. I mean, it becomes a health and economic catastrophe for millions.
Which brings us directly to the structural role muscle plays. It's not just about moving around. It's about protection. It's like a dynamic cushion for our joints and bones.
It's the body's natural suspension system. Strong muscles surround and support major joints like your knees, your hips, your spine. They act as dynamic stabilizers.
So they keep things aligned properly during movement.
Exactly. They ensure that when you move, the joints track correctly and that impact forces are absorbed by the muscle tissue, not directly by your cartilage or your ligaments.
And this is crucial for preventing that long-term wear and tear or chronic pain.
Absolutely. A lack of muscular support is often a major contributor to knee and lower back pain. If your hamstrings, your glutes, and your core are weak, the mechanical load gets shifted incorrectly onto the joint structure itself, which just accelerates those degenerative processes. Strong muscles literally reduce the load on your skeleton.
Okay, let's talk about the bone protection side. We always hear about calcium and vitamin D, but how does strength training physically strengthen our bone density?
It's through a process called mechanotransduction.
Okay.
Your bone tissue is adaptive. It responds directly to the mechanical forces you place on it. So when you lift heavy weights, your muscles contract and they pull forcefully on the bone. That tension signals specialized cells called osteoblasts to ramp up bone formation.
So the body's basically saying, hey, we're putting serious stress on this limb. We need to reinforce the structure to handle the load?
Exactly that. You are literally telling your skeleton to harden itself.
Yeah.
This mechanical stimulus is vital for increasing bone mineral density, which is the key defense against osteoporosis.
And we have hard data on this.
We have undeniable data. A 2022 study in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research showed that older individuals who consistently did high-intensity resistance training, not just light walking, had significantly higher bone density in their hips and spine, leading to dramatically fewer fractures later in life.
And of course, the combination of strong joints and dense bones is the ultimate defense against falls.
It is the single most important defense. Falls are just catastrophic. They're the leading cause of injury-related deaths and long-term disability in older adults. Strong muscles improve your proprioception, your body's sense of where it is in space, and they dramatically improve your dynamic balance and reaction time. If you trip on a rug, that split-second ability to brace, shift your weight, and recover. That is entirely dependent on the strength and responsiveness of your leg and core muscles. Sarcopenia just steals that safety margin.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the big takeaway here is that muscle is the ultimate insurance policy against immobility, pain, and accidental injury. And the brain benefit is just a bonus on top.
It's all synergistic. Physical resilience underpins your cognitive and your structural resilience.
Okay, now let's look at the biggest picture of all, longevity. Segment 3. Muscle as the currency of longevity and health insurance. You framed muscle as long-term health insurance. Let's see the data that proves that claim.
When longevity researchers analyze these huge groups of people over decades, they're constantly looking for early predictors of how long and how well someone will live. And consistently, muscle strength and muscle mass emerge as extremely powerful, independent predictors of positive outcomes.
And what specific outcomes are we talking about here?
Well, the list is pretty comprehensive. Higher muscle mass is consistently associated with lower all-cause mortality.
Meaning people with more muscle die less frequently from any cause.
Exactly. We see a reduced risk of primary chronic diseases, including type 2 diabetes, obviously, and a significantly reduced risk of cardiovascular disease.
And you mentioned cancer survival, which is a massive factor. How does muscle play a role there?
During treatment, your muscle mass acts as a reserve. Cancer and its treatments are incredibly catabolic. They cause the body to break down tissue rapidly.
Right.
Patients who start their treatment with higher muscle mass, particularly in their core and limbs, are just more likely to tolerate chemotherapy and radiation. They maintain physical function during recovery, and they experience better overall survival rates because they have a greater protein reserve to fuel their immune function and tissue repair.
That concept of a reserve is so key. When you're facing surgery or a serious illness like pneumonia, doctors talk about having functional capacity. Muscle is that ultimate reserve tank.
It's the biological reservoir of resilience.
Yeah.
If you're bedridden for 2 weeks with a severe flu, you will inevitably experience rapid muscle breakdown. If you start that illness with significant healthy muscle reserves, you can withstand that catabolic state, prevent severe frailty, and recover your functional strength much, much faster. A weaker individual might never fully regain the mobility they lost. Muscle is your safety margin against all the inevitable challenges life throws at you.
And this brings us back to the core thesis of this entire deep dive. If muscle is so critical, how does it stack up against the metric we've been using for decades? BMI and overall weight.
Okay, this is the moment for the listener to really lean in. We are taught to fear a high BMI. But according to findings cited all the time by the American College of Sports Medicine, ACSM, maintaining your muscle mass is a stronger predictor of longevity and all-cause mortality than weight or BMI alone.
I need to challenge that a bit. BMI is used everywhere by insurance companies, doctors, public health campaigns. Why is muscle a better predictor?
Because BMI is a deeply flawed metric when you apply it to individuals. It only measures your weight relative to your height. It has zero ability to differentiate between fat mass and lean mass.
So you could have two people with the same BMI who are totally different.
Totally different. You can have two people, same height, same BMI. One is sedentary, has very low muscle mass and high visceral fat. That's called sarcopenic obese. The other is a lifelong athlete with high muscle mass and low body fat.
And the athlete would probably be labeled overweight or obese by the BMI chart.
Correct. But that athlete has a fantastic metabolic profile, robust bone density, and enormous reserves. The sarcopenic obese individual, on the other hand, is at extremely high risk for metabolic syndrome, falls, and cardiovascular events, despite having a normal BMI. Muscle provides the protection that the BMI metric completely misses.
So the quality of your weight is far more important than the quantity. It's really body composition that matters.
Precisely. And that's why Dr. Stuart Phillips' famous quote resonates so powerfully among researchers. He said, "Muscle is the currency of health. The more you have, the better you'll withstand illness and the aging process."
It really is like a high-yield savings account for your future self.
It is. Every bit of muscle mass you maintain or build is buying you more health and independence years down the road.
That puts an incredible emphasis on what we do today. But let's shift from disease prevention to just daily reality. Beyond fighting off catastrophe, what does this strength currency buy me in terms of my quality of life?
It buys you freedom and confidence. We often focus too much on avoiding the bad things, and we forget the importance of actively enabling the good things. Strong muscles translate directly into sustained functional independence.
Can you give us some tangible, high-value examples that really impact daily life?
For sure. Think about the small but crucial things. Being able to open a stubborn jar without asking for help. Having the core strength to stand up from a deep, soft chair quickly and easily.
Or carrying your heavy suitcase up 2 flights of stairs without needing to stop for a break.
Yes. Or lifting and playing with a growing grandchild without feeling exhausted or strained afterward. For those who love to travel, having the endurance and strength to hike for hours on uneven ground or just explore a new city all day without that debilitating fatigue.
These aren't spectacular feats of strength, but they are the cumulative actions that really define a high quality of life.
They are. When your muscle mass declines, these daily activities become chores. Your world shrinks because your physical capacity shrinks. Building and maintaining strength ensures your options stay open, allowing you to remain active in your hobbies, your social life, and your family life for decades longer.
So it's not just about longevity, it's about vitality. It's ensuring that those last decades are active, not defined by limitation.
That is the ultimate return on the investment of lifting weights.
This has been incredibly motivating. So for the listener who is fired up right now, I'm sold. Muscle is my longevity asset. Let's transition to segment 4. Practical steps and actionable takeaways. We need a concrete blueprint based on these sources.
We do. And the good news is that the blueprint is consistent and it's accessible, and it's largely outlined by the American College of Sports Medicine. The first principle is just consistency and frequency. You don't need to live in the gym, but you need to show up regularly.
So what does that minimum effective dose look like? How do we reap these massive health benefits?
The ACSM standard is 2 to 3 dedicated days of resistance training per week. And importantly, those sessions have to target all the major muscle groups. You need that systemic input to get the myokine and hormonal benefits we talked about.
So you could do full body workouts 3 times a week.
You could, or you could do a 2-day split targeting different groups. The key is just never letting more than a few days pass without sending that signal to your muscles.
And for those of us who prioritize efficiency, what are the bang-for-your-buck exercises that provide the most comprehensive systemic stimulus?
You want to focus intensely on compound lifts. These are movements that involve multiple joints and muscle groups at the same time, which maximizes the metabolic and mechanical stress needed to trigger adaptation.
So you're talking about the big ones.
The big ones. Variations of the squat goblet, body weight, barbell, the deadlift, presses like push-ups or overhead press, and pulls like rows or pull-ups. These movements engage the vast musculature of your legs, your back, and your core, and they generate the most potent signal for strength, bone density, and hormonal response.
Okay, so resistance is the stimulus. Now let's talk about the fuel. What is the #1 nutritional requirement for turning that resistance into healthy, resilient muscle tissue?
Protein, and specifically high-quality protein consumed regularly. For optimal muscle preservation and growth, especially as we age, the recommended range is between 1.2 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day.
And that is often significantly higher than what many older adults or even busy professionals are eating. If I weigh 80 kilograms, which is about 176 pounds, I should be aiming for between 96 and 160 grams of protein every day. That takes some planning.
It requires intention, and critically, it requires distribution. You can't just eat one massive protein meal at dinner and expect the same results.
Why is that?
Because muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, is maximized when you consume roughly 25 to 40 grams of high-quality protein every 3 to 5 hours. MPS needs a consistent trigger, specifically the amino acid leucine.
So the practical advice here is to make sure that protein sources like lean meats, eggs, dairy, legumes are consciously included in every major meal and maybe a snack, not just tacked on at the end of the day.
Exactly. You're trying to trigger that muscle-building signal multiple times throughout the day, ensuring you have the raw materials, the amino acids, available when your body needs them for repair and growth.
So we have the stimulus, which is resistance, and the fuel, protein. What are the practical pillars that ensure long-term success and help us avoid burnout or plateaus?
The first one is consistency over intensity. You do not need to be crushed and sore after every single workout. The key principle is progressive overload.
Right. Your muscles adapt. If you always do the same thing, they stop changing. You have to gradually increase the demand over time.
And how do I apply progressive overload without just adding more weight every week, which isn't always possible or safe?
There are so many ways. You can increase the weight slightly, yes. But you can also increase the repetitions or reps within a set. You can increase the number of sets you do. You can decrease the rest period between sets. Or a really effective one is increasing the time under tension.
What does that mean?
For instance, making the lowering phase of a squat, the eccentric phase, last for 3 to 4 seconds. It forces the muscle to work harder without necessarily needing a heavier weight. The key is just making the muscle work harder than it did last time.
That makes the process sound much more scalable and less intimidating. And the second crucial pillar you mentioned was recovery.
Muscles grow outside of the gym. If you stimulate muscle growth but then deprive your body of rest, you completely undermine the whole process. Prioritizing quality sleep aiming for 7 to 9 hours is non-negotiable because that's when your growth hormone peaks and most of the tissue repair happens. And at the same time, managing your chronic stress is vital because high cortisol levels counteract the anabolic signals we're trying to create.
And finally, let's just emphasize movement outside of the dedicated workout. Does that daily activity still count for something?
Oh, absolutely. The dedicated resistance training is essential for the maximum systemic benefits, but the sources remind us that simply avoiding long periods of being inactive is incredibly protective.
So walking, taking the stairs.
Walking, standing more often, opting for the stairs, carrying your own groceries, this general non-exercise activity is crucial for maintaining your metabolic health and a high functional capacity. Sitting is metabolically destructive, so every moment you choose to move protects those systems.
Okay, let's tackle some common concerns the listener might have before they start. First, the balance. Muscle versus fat loss.
Both matter. We aren't saying to ignore body fat. Reducing excessive visceral fat is critical for reducing cardiovascular risk. However, the evidence is just overwhelming that focusing on muscle building and maintenance offers greater, broader systemic protection, metabolic, cognitive, structural, than focusing on fat loss alone. You want to prioritize optimizing your body composition, which means maximizing your lean mass.
And the age-old concern, especially for women. Will lifting weights cause me to bulk up excessively?
This myth needs to be definitively put to rest. Women absolutely need to lift weights for their bone density, their metabolic health, their independence.
But the fear is real for many.
It is, but because women naturally have significantly lower testosterone levels than men, the hormonal environment just doesn't support the level of hypertrophy, that massive muscle growth that most women fear. They will gain strength and lean definition, which is aesthetically and functionally beneficial, without acquiring excessive size. The health benefits are just too profound to ignore this type of training.
And what if I'm in my 70s or 80s and I feel like I've missed the boat? Is it truly possible to build muscle that late in life?
A resounding yes. This is one of the most encouraging findings in all of gerontology. While the rate of muscle protein synthesis is a bit slower in older adults, the muscle's capacity to respond to the stimulus of resistance training remains intact, regardless of your age.
You can still see real results.
Absolutely. Studies show that people well into their 80s and 90s, when they start a consistent strength program, can still gain substantial strength and functional capacity, reversing years of frailty. It is never too late to make those longevity deposits.
And the final practical question. What's better for that progressive overload bodyweight exercises or weights?
Both work, as long as you adhere to that principle of progressive overload. If you're new to this, bodyweight exercises, squats, push-ups against a wall. Lunges are perfect for building a foundational strength base and learning the movement patterns.
And then as you get stronger.
As you get stronger, you have to find ways to make them harder. That might mean elevating your feet for push-ups, adding a resistance band, or eventually transitioning to dumbbells or barbells. The tool is secondary to the principle, making the muscle work harder over time.
And a sobering final thought for this segment. How quickly do I lose this currency if I stop? What's the penalty for taking a long break?
It is surprisingly swift. Detraining effects, including measurable drops in your strength and metabolic function, can begin within just a couple of weeks of stopping consistent training.
Wow, just weeks.
After a month of total inactivity, you will have lost a significant portion of the adaptations you worked so hard to achieve, which just underscores why consistency, those 2 to 3 days a week, is the non-negotiable foundation of this entire strategy.
I think the most important takeaway for someone just starting is that the gains don't have to be extreme to be transformative.
That is the perfect point to end on. We have to remember the results from that study in the Lancet Public Health. It clearly showed that older adults who added even modest strength training to their routine, not competitive weightlifting, just modest training, significantly reduced their risk of long-term disability. Small, sustainable changes yield huge, life-altering longevity dividends.
We've reached the end of this deep dive, and I genuinely feel that we've successfully shifted the conversation from focusing on the scale to focusing on systemic resilience. Can you give us a final summary of the key takeaways for the listener?
The main message is clear. Your muscle mass is your greatest asset for a long, healthy life. It's the core regulator of your metabolism, actively clearing blood sugar and secreting anti-inflammatory myokines.
Hmm.
It protects your structural integrity against falls and osteoporosis, and through BDNF, it guards your cognitive health. This tissue is the true currency of your future independence.
And the path to acquiring that currency is consistent and accessible. 2-3 sessions of resistance training per week, prioritizing those big compound movements, fueling the repair process with enough high-quality protein, and always focusing on progressive overload and quality recovery.
It's an accessible path to resilience at any age. Now, to leave you with a thought to mull over, based on this principle that strength training signals BDNF and fights frailty.
Okay.
Since we know muscle strength is a stronger predictor of cognitive health and longevity than many traditional markers, what seemingly mundane daily activity could you intentionally transform into a microdose of strength training?
That is a fascinating challenge. So instead of leaning against the counter while you stir dinner, you could actively engage your core and leg muscles by doing a wall sit or a slight squat.
Exactly. Or instead of hunching over to pick up a heavy box of deliveries,
You could practice bracing your core and performing a small, intentional deadlift movement.
find that moment of progressive overload in your normal day. Turn daily function into functional training.
This has been an incredibly insightful and actionable deep dive into the science of longevity through muscle. Thank you so much for guiding us through all these sources.
My pleasure, and thank you for listening.
And remember, for more educational material and practical advice on fitness, nutrition, and wellness, you can always visit bfit.ai. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.